Kyra, can you just give me a quick background on what you do?
Of course. So I help people with self-sabotage. I studied psychology and went into psychology research. And so my passion is really in helping people understand those thoughts and behaviors that get in the way of them and their goals and help them move into more of self-leadership so they can actually achieve those goals.
Yep. And you post a lot of insightful content. And one of the things I looked at was procrastination. This is an interesting topic because we all have days where we procrastinate. I need to go to the gym. I need to get the house chores done. But is there a psychological reason as to why we procrastinate?
Yeah, I would say there's a couple of reasons why we procrastinate, depending on, I guess, which angle you look at it from. From the lens of, like what's happening in our minds neurobiologically, when we procrastinate, sometimes it's just that we get a bigger reward from staying comfortable and not actually taking any action than we would be to do the task. Because often we procrastinate things that we may not really want to do, or there may be an aspect of it that is like, I don't know what to do, like I don't know what the next step is, or I feel dumb if I'm going to do this, such as like studying or doing a certain task at work. Or it's like, say you're procrastinating going to the gym, it's like, I don't want to go into discomfort. So we
Mm.
have this mechanism keeping us in that comfort zone.
So can procrastination, can that be a form of self-sabotage?
Yeah, absolutely. Because the whole reason self-sabotage, I guess, exists is it's just a form of protection. So it's protecting us from experiencing, feeling something. So if you had a deep fear that I'm really dumb, I'm not smart enough, people are going to criticize me, all these things, then you're going to procrastinate doing tasks that could potentially activate that feeling and that wound. So, for example, you may procrastinate studying, or you may procrastinate putting yourself out there due to fear of criticism. So, the procrastination comes up as like a strategy to protect us from these things we don't want to feel.
Yeah. And what are some science-backed tricks to help with procrastination?
I would say, again, depending on the method, we need to really think about every behavior stems from a thought. So if we focus on shifting the thoughts surrounding the behavior, that's the first step to enable us to actually shift it. So you can shift it from the thought level and from the emotional level. So let's say I felt like I was procrastinating studying. I could then think, okay, what are the thoughts I have surrounding this problem? Like, why am I actually avoiding doing this? And it might not just be, I don't want to study. It might be, I don't want to study because if I get a bad grade, then my self-worth is going to drop and I'm going to be full of shame and full of guilt. So I'm going to avoid that whole scenario by avoiding it. And so if we notice that thought, we can catch it and be like, well, actually, me studying, I'm just learning a topic. Like objectively, it actually doesn't measure my self-worth. And if I can start to reframe those thoughts to focus on the objective action and kind of reframe it into more of a positive thing, we will feel safer in actually doing the behavior. So there's like that thought level one. Otherwise, you've got things like conditioning. So using rewards and things like kind of like how you train a dog, where you associate a certain thing with a reward. So it could be, I will say I'm procrastinating studying again. Maybe it's I'll go study for 15, 20 minutes and then I'll have a little reward, or maybe it's an hour and you can start to stretch it out and use like reward based strategies in order to not procrastinate. So there's quite a few different ways that I would recommend people trying, depending on what the core reason is that they're avoiding it.
Yeah. And what about laziness? Is that just a form of self-sabotage, or is it a lack of motivation? What goes on in the brain?
I would say with laziness, again, I think with anything in psychology, you're going to have perspectives from a lot of different areas. So when it comes to laziness, there's laziness from a perspective of I've actually worked a lot and this is actually rest, but I'm calling it laziness because I'm addicted to overperforming and never resting. Then there's laziness that's like I rest way more than I actually do anything. And that's what I be perceived as being like lazy. And in that aspect, again, it definitely could be self-sabotage from the lens of self-protection. Because for as long as I'm lazy and I get to lie in bed all day or however laziness comes up for you, then what do I gain? Like what do I actually gain from staying lazy? Usually we get to protect ourselves from putting ourselves out there, doing uncomfortable things, doing scary things. And it's like a very convenient strategy to keep us safe from pursuing these big goals that we might actually be afraid of. So in the
Mm,
brain, it can come up from, I guess, like when it comes to life today, our brains weren't designed to function in such a society where we have access to so much fast, cheap dopamine. And that's that reward motivation kind of chemical in our brain. And so we become quite lazy because we get addicted to those short, cheap hits of dopamine, whether that's through scrolling or watching TV a lot or eating high sugary foods. We can feel rewarded and motivated internally by doing nothing. Whereas
mm,
in like back when we were hunters and gatherers, you would get dopamine from being outside, spending a lot of time like hunting or cooking, because the best form of dopamine is when it takes a long time to actually receive. Like you have to put in effort to receive dopamine for it to feel really good, which is why we still get things like dopamine when we, do like a long run, we start to get those endorphins and things like that. So I think that there's always going to be multiple things happening at once. It can be a protection strategy, and also it can just be the way our brain's kind of wired to for that quick, short dopamine.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned dopamine too, Kyra, because, for those people that are listening and don't know what dopamine is, it's a neurochemical in the brain for motivation and drive. And I don't know if you know who David Goggins is. Do you know who he is?
Yeah.
Yeah, so he's talked about hardening of the mind and doing, I call it voluntary adversity. It's putting yourself in uncomfortable positions, whether it's, this is why the whole ice bath thing is the craze. People are jumping in the ice bath, and it's doing things like that over and over again that has a positive outlook on your mental space, in particular dopamine. And this is something that I think builds resiliency as well.
Hmm.
And we all fall into this trap, as you mentioned, that doom scrolling on social media. It is. We're living in a very fast paced world, and yet we are so disconnected in a sense from our own self. What would you recommend as some strategies to accelerate dopamine in a more natural way, whether it be an ice bath or a cold shower? You mentioned doing tasks, because you feel good after doing certain tasks, don't you?
Yeah, I would say it's important to remember. So when you wake up, the place that you get your first hit of dopamine for the day, you are going to crave that the entire day. So if you have a very sugary breakfast, you're going to crave sugar the whole day. If you start scrolling, you're going to feel that urge to scroll the entire day. So it's important to start your day with an activity that creates dopamine in more of a slow, healthy way. So that can be putting your face in the sun, like going outside. It can be going into nature. It can be doing breath work or visualization or meditation or reading, like educating yourself. I would say try stay away from screens for the first 30 minutes to an hour of the morning. Do something else that's going to make you feel really good for the day, and that can kind of help, as well as you can use strategies such as I use Opal, so it blocks all my social media for certain periods of the day. I also put my phone in black and white, and then I just do not want to look at it. So that can be really helpful. But I would say doing something hard is really good. So exercising first thing in the morning, the ice baths, going for a swim in the ocean. If you think our brains know, like in reality, our brains know what's good for us. If you say, what is all the things that I know is going to make me feel really good, even if I don't really want to do it, you'll get a whole list of things for yourself. So I think it's important to literally just ask your brain sometimes, and chances are it'll know what it needs to do.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I learnt this from Charles Poliquin. Rest in peace to him. He was a famous strength coach. He talked about the meat and nut breakfast. So the first bite that you eat in the morning, provided it's food, will set up your entire neurotransmitter production for the whole day. So meat and nuts is an interesting one because it's high protein and high fat, and it's designed to help with dopamine and acetylcholine, both of your neurochemicals that help with drive, motivation, as we said in dopamine, but also acetylcholine, which is focus and attention. And supposedly the meat provides a steady, slow release in blood sugar. The nuts provide a healthy source of smart fats that keeps your blood sugar level stable for an extended period of time. And you know, you're right. Most people reach for something sugary first thing in the morning, and it's the old saying: if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. But do you think this is also where self-compassion comes into play, in particular for, you know, we were talking about procrastination and anxiety. You know, having a little bit of that self-compassion. You know, just having that daily practice.
Of course. I think that oftentimes we think that we can shame ourselves into change, but the reality is, like anyone who experiences this, where they just constantly shame themselves and go into shame all the time, that strategy doesn't work. And you know that it doesn't work because
Yeah.
otherwise things would have changed in the past. And what shame does is it actually keeps us very, very stuck and actually repeating the cycle. So, what's important is that we shift it into a state of self compassion, and one way I really encourage people to practice that self-compassion is look at everything from a very curious lens, because when we look at something from a curious perspective, it removes the feelings of shame and guilt, and we can see it from a different perspective. So instead of shaming yourself and saying, I scroll all day, I eat really sugary foods all day, whatever it is, look at that and say, that's really interesting. I wonder why I'm actually doing that. What am I trying to soothe myself from? How can I give myself more compassion? Because I'm obviously trying to manage my stress or manage my emotions in some way. How can I look at this from more of a compassionate lens, that this is just an unhelpful strategy I've learned? Maybe I can try something else.
Yeah. Can you talk to me about emotional regulation? This is fascinating because many times you see, for example, like a road rage accident or an incident on the road, and someone just cuts someone off, gets out of the car and starts, you know, verbally escalating things. And then obviously it leads to some sort of conflict. And I'm thinking, what a bunch of big old grown up babies. You know, like, and this is something that, you know, I stem from martial arts, you know, is I think that I understand there's a line that I don't cross because violence happens, but it comes down to emotional regulation. And this comes down to emotional intelligence. But can you talk a little bit about that?
Of course. So, I guess first thing to understand is that emotions are a signal in our body, and it's literally just energy in motion, and we can feel it in our body. Everyone knows when you feel certain emotions, you might feel it in your gut, you might feel it in your chest, you might start to, get really like lightheaded. It can come up in so many different ways. It can create tension in your back. And when it comes to emotional regulation, it's essentially that skill to be able to feel safe, feeling your emotions and letting the energy flow through you. And when we don't allow that to happen, so for example, when we hold a lot of emotions from the past, whether that's sadness, anger, all these things, it stores in our body and we're very tense all the time. And it can lead to things like chronic pain and all these different health conditions and things. And that comes from not being safe feeling it. So if you grew up and you weren't modeled how to actually process anger, if no one said, okay, it's okay to feel anger, but this is how you need to release it, maybe it's jumping up and down, stomping your feet, getting it out in some way, not yelling at someone, then those people never actually learn that skill to be able to feel their anger properly. And so they suppress it, which means they get a very small window of tolerance, which is essentially that the our ability to go our ability to kind of stay in a safe state of emotions, where someone with a very small window of tolerance, someone cuts them off, they're blowing up because they can't actually calm themselves and be like, this is okay. Whereas somebody with a much bigger window of tolerance, it takes a big thing for it to shake them. And even then, they're able to kind of come back down and calm themselves because, like I said, they can actually feel and process that emotion coming out. So I would say the person that blows up and is very short tempered, they do not know how to actually release their anger in a healthy way. This is why I really believe that people who do martial arts, they are such calm people because one of the best ways to regulate ourselves is through exercise and repetitive motion. And one thing I've helped people who have experienced trauma and things before, and one of the best things for them is go hit pads, go for a
Mm.
run, because that rhythmic tempo lets you process the emotions, it gets all the energy out, and it happens in such a repetitive way that it kind of like trains our body to stay very calm under pressure.
Yeah, and you mentioned trauma as well, Kyra. And, when we talk about trauma, it can be where a caregiver wasn't present, whether it be the mum or the father. But how does that play a role in our emotional intelligence? How does trauma affect us in our day to day lives?
I think the trauma defined, I guess, trauma isn't the event that happens, it's the internal thing that happens within us. So it's not the parent leaving, it's the parent leaves, we get an emotional process within us that we don't know how to process or complete, and so it gets stuck. So that could be that abandonment, that wound of abandonment could be created, and we could start to feel certain emotions that we don't know how to release, which is why like millions of people can go to war and not every single person will get PTSD because some of them will be able to process the things that they're seeing. Some people can't, and that creates that traumatic experience in their body. Now, how that kind of leads into emotional intelligence is when we experience trauma, there's a few different adaptations that can occur within us because something happened, everything about us is programmed. If we experience something very stressful and scary, we get a significant increase in cortisol. We've got inflammatory biomarkers, which is essentially measures of stress in our blood, hair, saliva. Those will increase. And that can put us into a state of fight or flight or freeze. And that can make it really hard for us to connect with our emotions. And the tricky thing is, a lot of the time, people don't realize they have low emotional intelligence. One of the signs of low emotional intelligence is you really struggle to hold relationships and you maybe really struggle to make friends because you may not have that ability to pick up on what emotions your friends are feeling and if you're saying the right thing or saying the wrong thing. And it just comes from that kind of block with emotions because if I've been really scared in the past, I might just block out all emotions and therefore I can not only not feel them in myself, I can't actually see them in others, and that affects my behavior.
Yeah, a lot of men, Kyra, really struggle to open up. In particular, you mentioned our romantic relationships. There's a fear of uncertainty and doubt. If I open up to my partner, she might weaponize it and use it against me in a future argument. And I've talked about this on countless podcasts and in Red Pill space and forums online and Reddit. The argument is never open up to your romantic partner because she'll use it against you. And there has been many stories where women have actually left their partner, they've lost attraction for him, even because he shed a tear. This is why the suicide rate is so much higher in men. But how can women play a role in helping men open up and express themselves? Because I think it's a man's job to protect a woman physically. And I think it's a woman's job to protect a man emotionally. And I think women are doing a very good job. There's a lot more support now. Women are sort of starting to um, really understand the challenges that both sexes are facing in the world, but still there's that inherent stigma from men. But how can women play a role in this?
I would say I would start by kind of saying that people's experience and their beliefs about whether or not they can express themselves and whether or not it'll be weaponized against them, it's going to be that learned experience. So they may know someone who they've opened up and their partner has turned it against them. They may have consumed content. They may have an experience like that with their parents. And so I think for it's tricky. Like for the men's side, I feel like it's considering, is this true or is this something that I've just learned and maybe it's not true with my current partner? For women, I think it's really important to understand that men don't process emotions the same way that we do. They genuinely don't have the same connections in the brain to help them be able to articulate and name their feelings. And so sometimes things like talk therapy can be a lot harder for men compared to different types of therapy because that ability to talk and explain our feeling is very much, it's a lot easier for women based on our brain, the based on the way our brain is kind of structured, because our brains operate from left to right, which means we engage both sides of our brain, whereas men, they go back and forth, so they're more on one side, which makes it hard for them to connect with the emotional side. And so for women, it's about really understanding that when your partner or a man does try to open up to you, really being present for them and just saying that you are there. Do not try to fix the problem. This is what a trap that I fell into. I thought when someone is upset, particularly a guy, I immediately go into problem solving mode because I'm like, okay, you probably want me to solve your problem, blah, 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 blah. But that can actually make them feel like something's wrong with them or that they shouldn't actually open up because then it seems like I'm trying to fix them. So in reality, we need to actually just shut up and let them speak and let them get out any of their emotions that they have and just say, like, this is okay. I am still here and I'm not going to go anywhere. It's safe for you to express your emotions. It's okay. Like I'm here to support you in any way that I can and not go into that, problem solving mode. And consider that oftentimes women, we do have a tendency to kind of make everything about ourselves. And I know that can be harsh to hear, but it's just the truth. Like, let's say your partner comes home from work and he just goes straight into the shower and doesn't speak to you. We immediately can be like, oh my God, what have I done wrong? Oh my God, he's such an asshole. Why is he doing this? In reality, he's probably had a really hard day at work. He's probably trying to process so many things that he doesn't even know how to get out. And we just immediately go into being a bitch mode. So
Mm.
it's really important for us to recognize that our partner doesn't have the same tools as us to be able to express their emotions. So we need to have that compassion and that understanding to help them in any way that we can, without trying to make it about us all the time.
Yeah. What do you think confuses the sexes, where men are confused about women and women are confused about men? What are some of the things that you've identified within your work where men just have a very difficult time understanding women from an emotional level and women don't understand men?
I would say women are very emotional. We're very emotional in our decisions and the way that we think about things. So we like, venting, and often we don't really want our problem solved either. We just want to kind of vent and get it out there. And then sometimes we want help solving our problems. Whereas men, they're very logical. So they're very much more, they struggle to be able to name and identify their emotions. And so they internalize it all the time. Like they go very much into that internalization. And they definitely, your partner can love you so much and still not know how to express his emotions. Like it actually has nothing to do with us and everything to do with just how we are in society and how, unfortunately, men are just not taught how to actually express and get those emotions out. And I think that there's a big issue right now where a lot of men feel very purposeless and directionless and all these things, and they don't know how to solve that problem because it's a very like societal level problem. And women, like, we have each other to kind of talk to and get our emotions out, and that's easy for us. But I feel like for women listening to this, I feel like for men, it's like as if we had all these emotions built up and we have all this going on, and all of a sudden we're mute. And we're like, we want to get it out. We want to tell people, but we can't because we've lost our voice. And it's that overwhelming feeling of, I need to get this out, but I don't know what to do. Like, I don't know how to actually get it out right now, if that makes sense.
Yeah. There's a fascinating article I'll have to send through to you, Kyra, after this. It's called The Lost Boys. And you did mention that purpose is something that men want to feel capable. They want to feel capable, they want to feel needed, they want to feel powerful. Are you familiar with the story about the Blitz that happened in World War II?
I don't think so.
Okay, so the Blitz is very fascinating. So when the bombs went off in England, there was just total anarchy and destruction, and you had these comatose patients, men in particular, that were completely catatonic, unresponsive, and just remained bedridden for years and years and years. And when the bombs started going off and there was fires, there was no one to drive essential service vehicles like fire trucks and ambulances. These men that were completely catatonic and just in, bedridden, got up out of their beds and started driving those essential service vehicles. And it just, you think about it, like, give a man a purpose and the ability to achieve it, and he will crawl over broken glass with a smile. And I think men just want to feel capable. They want to feel powerful. Um, and sometimes too, like, I think it's amazing because women have just done so well economically, in the workforce, and they should have had always the rights that they should have always had. But I think what's happened now is men have drastically fallen behind, and this has also affected dating and relationships. If a woman outworks the man or outperforms the man socioeconomically, he's more likely to use erectile dysfunction medication. It's also a higher chance of divorce if they were married as well. So men want to feel capable, they want to feel powerful, they want to feel needed. And I think this is also some of the disconnection that's happening. But what do you think we can do as a society to better help men, but also women to understand men better?
I think it's important to consider that, yes, there is the aspect of women out earning their partner and the, I guess, dynamic that that can create. But it's important that to really recognize that there can be other ways as well to kind of build that respect up. So, for example, the women that I know that out earn their partners, they still very much respect their partner in, every single area. And they're very much like, adore their partner, and they still get led by their partner, and their partner is still in that leadership role because he still leads her throughout life in different areas. It doesn't have to matter that she makes more money than him. And I think that it's about having those conversations and really recognizing that and connecting with each other and saying, like, this is all the things I respect about you, this is all the things I respect about you. And if you do want to lead, if you do want a partner to lead, sometimes it is important to kind of, for women, if you do want that, to take a step back. I actually attended a masterclass by Curtis Toffer a couple of days ago. It was very, very good. And one quote that he said, which really stuck with me, is if you want a man to lead, if you want him to basically sit in the throne, you need to get out of it. Because if I'm sitting in the masculine and feminine role and I'm trying to do everything all the time, but I want a man to lead, how do I expect him to be able to lead me if I'm sitting in his place? I actually have to surrender and step back in order for him to feel safe in stepping up.
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? Yeah, it's very interesting. Yeah. Um, I saw this podcast. There was it was interesting. The woman said that women say what they feel, men say what they think. And you mentioned that men think of terms of logic, whereas women think of terms of how they feel. And emotions are fleeting. They fluctuate. They change all the time. One minute you're happy, one minute you're sad. Um, what would be some advice to women, um, especially that if they are in a committed, relationship, that emotions are fleeting. You're not always going to stay there. If you're feeling depressed and sad, don't be so impulsive, because I have known women, and I'm not saying all women, but some women can be quite impulsive and will, you know, react because of how they feel. And this is why 70 to 80% of divorces are initiated by women, especially in America. But what would be some advice to women out there?
Say it's important to understand the different levels of emotions. There's going to be emotions that are true signals from things that are happening, such as something happens, you have that signal, you feel sad, and you need to feel that. Then there's the aspect of emotions that are just repetitive day in, day out. And there's those emotions that come to pass. So, for example, one strategy that kind of comes up for sabotage is a certain emotion comes up and it pulls us towards a certain behavior. So, for example, when it comes to binge eating or overeating, it's usually fueled by an emotion. It might be, I feel shame, I feel guilt, I feel sadness. I'm going to go soothe that with food. Those emotions, they will pass. If you actually notice the emotion come up and you imagine it like a cloud, it's going to actually go past if you resist that urge to give in to soothe it. But the more you give in to soothe it, the more it creates like a addictive behavior pattern, and the more that emotion's going to come up because you're going to feel shame, you're going to reach for the food, eat the food, you're going to feel good, and then it's going to drop and you're going to feel the shame again, and it's going to be this loop. Whereas if you actually don't reach for the food and you sit in it and think, okay, what is this? Why is this here? I'm just going to sit in it until it passes. You're not going to learn that pattern and you're not going to feel the pull towards the food. It's just going to pass and you're not going to have that pattern playing in your daily life.
Mm. Kyra, what have you come to discover about yourself? It's an interesting road that you've been on. And why did you step into the world of psychology? Was it, can you run me through your story and your background?
Yeah, of course. So I grew up traveling the world. So I was born in South Africa, then I lived in England, then I lived in Thailand, then New Zealand, and then Australia. And then in between all of that, I was traveling to various countries around the globe as well. And I grew up seeing a lot of poverty, a lot of like third world countries and a lot of people who had different privilege than I did. And I grew up understanding at a very deep level that I had a certain level of privilege that like billions of people would never have. And that kind of put in the forefront of my mind from very young. I'm in a position to help people. Like, there's no other option. I feel like it's such a waste of my privilege if I don't help people. So I always knew I wanted to help someone in that way. And one of the biggest realizations for me, it happened a couple of times, but I think the most impactful, I think I was maybe 14 or 15. I had just come back from South Africa on a trip to Australia. So I moved to Australia for high school. I lived in New Zealand for all of primary school and lived in Australia for all of high school. So when I was 14, 15, I'd just come back from a holiday from South Africa, and there's obviously a lot of poverty there. I come back to Australia and I'm going to school, and I noticed that a lot of my friends, they have depression, they have anxiety, they're really struggling with their mental health. And I remember thinking like you have so much privilege, you have so access to so much. Like, why is it that you struggle so much mentally when there's people that have nothing and they're the happiest people in the world? Like, in Vanuatu, they are literally voted the happiest country in the world for like the past few years. And like you go there, especially the islands that don't have much tourism, there's no such thing as technology, there's no, it's completely different to the Western world. They don't have sugar, it's all natural, it's all self-contained islands. Why are they the happiest people in the world? Yet us, with so much opportunities and so much resources, we're the most depressed and the most anxious. So I got really curious in that. I started working into management in business and stuff, and I was managing a team of maybe like 30 people. And I realized that they were coming to me for a lot of personal issues, and it was connecting with them and helping them personally that I loved, not the business side. And so I was halfway through an MBA, a master's in business admin, and I decided to stop and switch to psychology and quit my job as a manager. And I actually moved back in with my parents because I was like, I'm going all in on psychology. I got qualified as a life coach, which took me about a year and a lot of supervised hours. I think back in maybe 20, I feel like it was 2019. It could have been, I can't remember if it was before or after COVID, but I got qualified and so I started coaching people. So then I started studying psychology because I adored learning about the mind and learning about human behavior. And I fell in love with research. So I started to work in research. I graduated in 2023 from psychology. Started a PhD, but the topic I was doing, I can't do right now. So I now just kind of help and assist in research. And then I just went all in on my coaching business. And then I still teach psychology to university students. So that's kind of like a summary of my story.
A fascinating journey. And I read somewhere that you survived an earthquake. Is that correct?
Oh, yeah. So in New Zealand, there was a 6.4 magnitude earthquake. So it was like the whole house was shaking. It was very, very loud. We lived on a river. There was a tsunami warning. It was quite intense. It was like, I think it was on Christmas Eve or something. It was pretty scary, but interesting.
Yeah, I bet. My goodness. That you also mentioned too that we are the most free and liberated as a society that we've ever been, you know. Even though yes, there are wars that go on, and what's happening in Israel and Gaza is terrible, but you know, compared to the Great Depression, World War I, and World War II, we're living in some of the best times out of human history. And yet, you're right, we are very disconnected. We're very depressed. We're more anxious than ever. And comparison is the thief of joy. And I think we do compare ourselves a lot to others. But how does comparing ourselves to others actually impact the brain and our happiness?
I'd say when it comes to things like social media, it's very easy for us to be making conscious comparisons, but I think we don't realize how much we actually subconsciously compare ourselves as well without even realizing it. And often it can create feelings of, that embarrassment or shame or sadness and all these things. And a lot of the time we don't see it. We're not like, oh yeah, I'm comparing myself to this person in this moment. We will just actually start to notice ourselves feel less confident and we'll start to notice our self-esteem drop. And so a lot of us are comparing ourselves without even realizing it, I think, a lot of the time. And that it's making it even worse now with like all the filters and all the editing and all that perceived perfectness that's not really achievable in real life that our brains is kind of comparing ourselves to constantly. And I guess from the brain lens, we can kind of fall into a pattern of almost like when it comes to sabotage, we can get addicted to comparing ourselves because it often is giving us something. If I compare myself and I make myself feel bad, cool, then I don't have to take any risks. I don't have to put myself out there. And we can start to fall into this pattern where we get addicted to certain things because they keep us safe, they keep us small, they keep us from taking risks. So it's important to recognize when we're falling into this pattern and recognize it's a protective strategy that's trying to keep us small and really start to come back to ourselves, whether that is like unfollowing anyone that you tend to compare yourself to, whether that's just not scrolling on social media, things like that, or going internally and focusing on like your strengths and really coming back to that. I think there's a few different ways you can go about it.
Yeah, definitely. And you're right. I think social media has, definitely fueled our constant comparison. There was another video I watched. I think it's a clip. I need to send you this one too on social conditioning. And women are obviously, comparing themselves online to other women, and men are comparing themselves to other men online. And, it's this constant pursuit that we're all trying to chase for the bigger, better deal. What about gratitude? That can play a huge role in how we feel and how we are. What are some of the strategies that people can practice, especially with gratitude?
Yeah, I think that's important that instead of just writing down what we're grateful for, whilst that is good and you do need to think about it, because when you think about what I am grateful for today, then your brain starts to focus on that. So you're going to have these dominant pathways that happen in your brain. If you think all the time everything positive that's going on for you and everything that you're grateful for, your brain's going to become more attuned to go down that pathway and it's going to look for more good in every single day. If you focus on all the negatives, your brain's going to go that way and try look for all the negatives. So it can be really good to like start your day listing 5, 10 things that you're grateful for and like getting your brain in that moment for the day. But do not write down what you are grateful for the entire day and then complain the entire day, because when you start to write things down and you can get into a habit of doing this very surface level personal development without actually having to change anything. And it makes you feel like you're progressing and doing the good things. But if it doesn't represent in your behavior, then there's no point. So I would say if you have been writing down things for a while and you're like, this isn't really helping, or I want to do something more, stop writing it down and write down instead what you are grateful for and how you are going to prove that you're grateful for that today. So rather than saying, I am grateful for my health, if you're not actually prioritizing your health throughout the day, are you actually grateful for it, or are you just writing that down for no reason? So, right, I am grateful for my health. And so I'm going to go for a walk or I'm going to go to the gym because I'm going to demonstrate how grateful I am to actually have my health today rather than just talking about it.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it, Kyra? Yeah. Is it true that if you're trying to practice gratitude and think positively, it takes probably 5 to 10 things that you are grateful for to outweigh a negative experience? Is that true?
I know that negative things, they do weigh heavier than positive things in our mind, which is why we often, like, if you were to think right now, all the time someone's criticized you, you would probably be able to name a lot. But if you think all the time someone's complimented me, you would struggle because our brain weighs that negative emotional stimuli a lot heavier than it does the positive. And so I would just say, I would just more so be focusing on the habit. I don't know the exact weights, but I would say you definitely do need to practice a lot of positive, a lot of gratitude in order for it to kind of, you know, feel like it's actually coming up true for you. But I would say the actions is the best thing, or like doing the opposite, kind of opposite, and thinking instead, what am I taking for granted? And writing that down instead. Because sometimes that can help. If you struggle with gratitude, write down everything you're taking for granted. I guarantee there's probably a lot.
Yeah. And what about our romantic relationships? Um, there's been many stories about people that will sabotage a healthy relationship, especially when there are a lot of green flags. And I'm sure you know about attachment styles and how they play a role in our romantic partners. But how can people do the work? How can they heal their past trauma to have healthier relationships? And can you talk a little bit about that?
Yep. So I would say it's important to always start with awareness. So awareness of where you currently at, whether that's understanding what your attachment style is. So whether it's that anxious, avoidant, that combined type, which is a bit of both, or that secure type, and recognizing wherever you are and just spending time actually learning what it is and how it looks and how it comes up and things like that. And then I would say, when it comes from a sabotage lens, like I said, it's all protection. So we're always pulled to something that is going to protect us. And often what our mind thinks is protecting us is just what's familiar to us. And so if we have either grown up in an environment where healthy relationship wasn't modeled to us, or one of our parents had certain behaviors or acted in a certain way that didn't model that healthy masculinity or that healthy femininity, then we're going to tend to go towards the types of relationships that kind of represent that or feel familiar. So for example, if you grow up and your dad is emotionally unavailable, you are going to you're going to be attracted to emotionally unavailable men just because it's familiar. It's just what you know. And so what you know, your brain's like, okay, we know this, so it must be safety, it must be comfort, and it gets confused. So recognize I would say recognize where is your brain getting confused? Like, where is it actually, if you find yourself being attracted to people that you're like, why am I attracted to this kind of person? Why am I not attracted to this like healthy, secure person? Get really curious about it and think like, why is my brain confused here? Why does this make sense? Like, what experiences in my past make this make sense? And how can I look at that from a different lens or a different angle and start to pull myself back towards the secure? And honestly, sometimes it's just about recognizing what we want, which we do all deep down, obviously want like a secure, healthy relationship. What parts of that make me feel unsafe? Sometimes it's the security of it, or it's like I used to personally be emotionally unavailable. I just didn't want to look at my emotions or go near them. And so I naturally, if I wanted to attract an emotionally unavailable person, because if they're emotionally unavailable, cool, I don't have to be emotionally available. I can stay in my emotionally unavailable state. So if you struggle to feel your emotions, you're probably attracting people who are doing the same. So I'd be looking at that. And when you focus on then you becoming secure, when you're secure, you'll then start to want to attract another secure person.
Yeah, and we hear stories about men and women in toxic relationships where their partner was a narcissist, or they keep attracting the same asshole, the treat them mean, keep them keen kind of personality. How does someone do the work? How does someone actually become secure, especially when they know that they keep attracting the same person over and over again, and they know that that person is not good for them? How do they get back to baseline? What are some therapy or strategies that you think would work?
I would say see the pattern, understand where it's coming from, and then it's all comes down to making lots of little decisions, to be honest. And so, for example, if you finally see the pattern, you're like, okay, I'm attracting this kind of person. I don't want to attract this kind of person anymore. You make that decision. Then it's about, okay, when I start to date somebody now, I have certain standards that I need the person to meet. So, for example, if you want somebody that's emotionally available, it's probably going to be they're going to have certain signals that they are emotionally available. If they don't have those signals, then it's like, okay, maybe I'm going towards the wrong direction. I'm going to make the decision to communicate that, see if anything shifts, or I'm going to like take a step back. Like when it comes to dating, I've been in a relationship for 3 years, so I feel like I'm a bit rusty on the process of dating. But I would say it's really about recognizing yourself and your values and what you want and understanding that to such a deep level and such a security within yourself that you feel okay to, make those decisions on, yes, this is what I want, this is what I don't want. And I don't believe that you have to, love yourself in order to be in a relationship or attract a partner. But I do think you have to respect yourself, because if you don't respect yourself, then there's gonna be so many mixed signals and you're just gonna really struggle to know, is this person doing this or is this person doing that? And you're gonna like really question it. So I think if you build the self-respect within yourself and that connection to yourself first, it makes it so much easier to know what you want and know what you don't want. From a therapeutic lens, there's different strategies, honestly. I would say my method that I help with my clients as a coach would be recognizing the wound or the pattern here. So, where did it stem from? What emotions are stuck there? What do we need to do to actually feel it and release it from our body? And we need to feel it. You can't just journal about it, you have to feel it in your body. And what do I need? What needs to happen in order for me to resolve this? And often it's sitting in it and actually just feeling it and looking at it from a different perspective and releasing that wound. Maybe it's making amends with not the person, but making amends with yourself or making amends with the parent or things like that. If you have the means to do so, there's quite a lot of different ways. It depends on the client, the wound, and what they've tried before, because everyone's different. So if you've tried
Mm.
something and it hasn't worked, please don't give up, because there are so many things you can try. There's not just one way. There's so many.
Yeah. And what about narcissism, Kyra? That's that buzzword that seems to be overused sometimes online. Are a lot of people narcissists? And can you define narcissism?
So narcissism is, I mean, in the psychological disorder, it's that person who's they come across as very kind of self-obsessed. So it's that person that they can come up as very manipulative, they can be gaslighting, they can be quite, they kind of, when they're diagnosed with the disorder, it's actually extremely hard to diagnose because if you think about it, when you're diagnosing someone, you're asking them questions, you're trying to understand how they're showing up. If you're trying to diagnose someone who's very manipulative, how do you trust what they're saying? You know, if they don't want to be
Mm.
diagnosed as a narcissist, how are you supposed to diagnose them? So it's very much that they have this sense of self that's very inflated. It's very much like, um, I wouldn't say they have no empathy, but their focus is on themselves. And narcissism can stem from two different directions. It can stem from when you're growing up, they're very, very celebrated, very, very highly like validated. They get all the attention, they get everything, you know, and it starts to boost that sense of self. It can also happen from the complete opposite, where they're torn down day in, day out, constantly, 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 that they then have this overcompensation that protects them. And it's like, no, I reject this. I'm going to inflate my sense of self and show up like I'm better than everyone else because this is what keeps me safe. So, same outcome, but two different pathways to get there. But when people kind of show up in this way, so whether it's when you get diagnosed with it, there's going to be biological, psychological, and social components that develop the disorder. When it's just traits of narcissism, sometimes it is, you know, it might be a trait of narcissism coming up as like a protective mechanism for the self. So if someone has low self-esteem and low self-worth, of course, I'm going to portray myself as sometimes as like this very important person because I refuse to look at that part of myself that actually really struggles with my self-esteem. Other times, I think we can definitely misinterpret it where someone is either like if we personally really, really, really want to be confident, yet we really struggle with our self-worth and we see a confident person, we can easily misinterpret that as narcissism. Because if I don't accept the fact that my self-esteem is low and I see someone who looks like they have high self-esteem, I immediately reject that because that's going to make me feel uncomfortable if I recognize that they're actually really happy and confident and I'm not. So I'm just going to say, no, you're a narcissist and just block it away. So I think there's a lot of nuance in it. It's a tricky conversation because, you know, if a client comes to me and says my partner is a narcissist, there's a lens of like, okay, this could be true, and they could actually be in a situation that's extremely bad for them, and they could be in harm, you know, or are they just completely misinterpreting their partner's signals and their partner's nowhere near a narcissist, you know? So it definitely is a difficult balance trying to understand and compassionately, you know, help people and connect with people when they experience this. But I think it's just, yeah, important to understand the different aspects of it.
Yeah. Do you feel that we tend to overlabel things? Um, the amount of disorders that are now being labeled, you've got obsessive compulsive disorder, attention deficit disorder, um, you know, autism is on the rise, which I think is linked to dietary and nutrition and lifestyle, which can influence obviously pregnancy. Social media has had a bit of an influence on our attention. A lot of young kids just don't know how to pay attention. They have TikTok brain. But do you think sometimes too that we do overlabel things and it's just because of lifestyle and our surroundings?
Yeah, I think we definitely have that part of ourselves that wants to label things. It's like that default mode that our brain kind of goes into. And it's like, I noticed this, I need to categorize it. It's like our brains has this pathway towards, I need to categorize something in order for me to understand it. So that definitely can come up. I think when it comes to the aspect of disorders and things like that, then the truth is like the way that we diagnose in psychology is for a certain disorder, there's a list of criteria that you have to meet Usually, it's experiencing a certain number of symptoms over a certain amount of time in a certain amount of areas, and it has to significantly impact your ability to function. So, for example, a lot of people would have symptoms of ADHD with that ability, that struggle to focus and that ability to be distracted and the memory problems and that executive dysfunction. But it wouldn't be diagnosed as ADHD unless there's a clear pattern over the lifetime. It significantly impacts their ability to work, their relationships. It can impact their health. It can impact so many things. When it impacts our ability to function as a normal person, that is when we diagnose just as a method of treating. So diagnoses can be super helpful in some aspects because it just gives us a framework on how to actually treat it. And it can be very validating for people who have struggled their entire life. Because I teach and tutor psychology, I work with a lot of people who have things like ADHD, autism, and learning disabilities such as dysgraphia, dyscalculia, dyslexia, things like that. I have ADHD as well, and I feel like I understand it to such a deep level because I have gone through the journey of not being diagnosed my entire life, being diagnosed, trying medication, and then I've now gotten to a place where I've been able to completely come off medication. So I haven't been on medication for I think feel like a year or two now.
Oh, amazing.
And yeah, so I feel like, but I wouldn't have been able to get my life to this point unless I got the diagnosis, because when I got the diagnosis, I was like, okay, this makes so much sense. And so rather than me just feeling like I was, full of shame and like, why can I not do this basic functional stuff? It was like, okay, no, I actually have all of these symptoms from this disorder that I have. I'm going to go through one by one and figure out how I can help myself. So, for example, I've got strategies for everything. I've got strategies for the dysregulation, the impulsivity, the forgetfulness, the executive dysfunction, because I know exactly how my brain works now from this diagnosis. I've been able to shift it. So I think that, again, there's the nuance in it where there's going to be the aspect where we just want to label things for ease, and then there's the aspect of it that can actually really help people.
Yeah, and I think too, as well, Cara, some people lack compassion towards others. Um, a spouse in a relationship might get a bit angry because the other person's a bit forgetful, but no fault of their own. It's just because of their condition, whether it be ADHD, uh, you know, or they have some sort of obsessive compulsive disorder. Um, how can we show more compassion towards one another? In particular, like what can we do to sort of better help one another, not just in our romantic relationships, but just in our friendships?
I think it's important to understand, you know, human behavior and humans in general. We're always doing the best we can with the resources that we have and the things that we've learned and the place that we are at. So when someone has certain behaviors or things, like it's a result of their previous experiences and what they have learned and how they have learned to function and survive. And sometimes, like, really applying that compassionate lens of like, this person, if this person is really forgetful all the time, or if they're really messy, or if they're struggling with this, they're not enjoying this. They're not doing it on purpose to make you upset. They're obviously struggling so much with it as well. So sometimes it is important to recognize, having that compassion towards the person and recognizing that things can things can shift and change, and we need to support them to help them. Because if I was struggling, like, my partner is very supportive with me and my ADHD, and if he had instead criticized me or shamed me, this would have made everything, like my symptoms, so much worse, because that's what perpetuates the cycle. Like, that's what makes us fall into these patterns, because like often with emotion, like with disorders, they're very like they touch on emotions a lot. And so if you're creating those emotions by not being understanding or compassionate, then it can make it worse. So sometimes compassion is the best answer.
Yeah. What do you think society is getting wrong about how we treat one another? You know, loneliness is on the rise. Men are lonely. women are more apprehensive. I'm hearing more and more stories of women on SSRIs and antidepressant medication. Suicide is just going through the roof. People are disconnected. People have forgotten how to connect. What is society doing wrong?
I think part of it definitely stems from the neurochemicals in our brain, from like the dopamine and the serotonin and the endorphins and the things that we are just not getting naturally anymore. Because the reality is, a lot of people, they wake up, they scroll, they have like a sugary breakfast, they go to work, they come home, they have like something, they might get takeout for lunch. They're constantly doing these actions that, first of all, they know are not good for them. So they're kind of like slowly breaking that self-trust with themselves. They're addicted to it because of the addictive properties of all of these things. They feel like they don't know how to change because everyone's doing the exact same thing, and they might not have someone in their life that can model what it should be like. They might struggle to take those first few steps because of all these internalized stories of and all the shame and all the guilt and all these things that have happened in the past. So I feel like as a society, we need to kind of we need to recognize the damage that these habits and these systems are actually doing on our life. We need to recognize that we are currently engaging in a pattern that is so bad for our brain health and so bad for ourselves. And the tricky part is, like, you're not going to want to change because they're so addictive. You're not going to want to stop scrolling. You're not going to want to start eating really healthy, and like going outside when you're stuck in this pattern, because that is the nature of it. So you do have to you have to do something hard. You do have to go against that addictive property. But I would say, if you do make the decision to start to shift your life and change things, just recognize that every single day that you choose that future version of yourself, that version you want to become, it's going to get easier each day. The first day is going to be the hardest because you're going to have all these urges to go everywhere. And one thing I always say to my clients is that everything is, you're just going to feel an urge. There's going to be an urge to do things. That's all it is. You're going to feel like, when it comes to sabotage, you're going to feel the urge to sabotage, whether that's through scrolling when you wake up. You're going to have the urge to eat sugary food. You're going to have the urge to go spend your money. And so I feel like as a society, we're just being a slave to all these urges all the time. Whereas in reality, it's just an urge. You can pause and say, I'm not going to give in to this urge right now. I'm going to instead do something, healthier with my life that really fulfills these needs that I'm trying to get met by these unhealthy things.
Yeah. Are you concerned or worried about the next generation and cognitively how they are as a person and what they're being brought up on? Um, do you fear for the future, or do you feel that we are on the right track, but we just got a lot more work to do?
I I feel like I do have worries at some points. Like, I do kind of have concerns. I have spoken to kids in high school. Like, I do work with kids in high school. I've done, public speaking there. I've done workshops there. It is scary, to be honest, at what they're experiencing and how they talk about things. And I remember one of the most shocking things that I had experienced, honestly. I was running a workshop on identity and values with a group of grade 12s at a high school. And I was getting them to basically figure out what's important to them, because I was like, when you figure out what's important to you, and you just make decisions that are in alignment with that, you will become happier. You will become, life is a lot easier when you know what's important to you and what to prioritize. Anyway, I did the activity, and I was like, okay, we're going to rank them. I want you to rank them from the most important to the fifth most important. And I got them to do it, and I was like, just let me know if you need help. And one of these girls, she popped up her hand, and I went over to help her, and she was like, I don't know what to do. I don't know if I should I really can't decide between putting beauty first or family first. And I was like, okay, like, talk me through it. Like, what is your reasoning? And she was like, well, I obviously love my family and I don't want to sound like a terrible person, but beauty is the most important thing to me in the world. I can't not have beauty. And I was so shocked at that moment. I was like, oh my God, like I didn't realize how bad this was. And all the other girls were like, yeah, me too, me too, me too. Like beauty is the most important thing. And I was like, oh my gosh, like I didn't realize that this was this bad, with all the filters and social media. So
Mm.
I definitely do worry when it comes to things like that. But I think that with social media, there is also the aspect of we have a lot more access to help these days. Like there's coaches putting out really good content. There's, psychologists and therapists and people expressing even just like their own experiences. There's so much personal like development and personal help out there. I do feel like it does give us access to the resources that we kind of need that can help us, progress as a society. But I feel like it's just the balance between, getting that out there, getting the right content out there. And, it's a big part of why I do what I do because I really want to contribute to that and create content that people can engage with and it can genuinely help them.
Yeah. Kyra, did you watch the show Adolescence on Netflix?
I did.
What did you think of that?
I thought it was really good. I think it really demonstrates the process that we kind of go through as humans and how we learn things and how we internalize things and how a lot of the time we make decisions that are not necessarily the best decision, but it's like what our brain came to realize. I think that a lot of the time people blindly trust their thoughts and blindly trust their brain when we don't recognize that our brain is like a computer. And if it's programmed a certain way, it's not always going to make decisions in our best interest. It's going to be impulsive. And if you put a small developing brain in an environment that's feeding them all these certain narratives and perceptions on things, they are going to start to develop an identity based on that. They're going to make decisions based on that because your experience and the information you take on and you internalize shapes your entire perception of the world. Like in that moment, I think his name's Jamie, like he didn't see other options because his brain didn't have that capability in that moment based on what he had engaged in and consumed, which I think is the scary part. And like it really comes down to behavior and how we act and who we are as people. And even the disorders, everything is a biological, psychological, and social lens. So there's going to be biological dispositions like temperament. You can measure in a baby how, emotionally reactive they are and how much they cry versus don't cry. Then you've got things like psychological, so our thought patterns, our experiences, our beliefs, our thoughts, and then social, like what social support does the person have and how do they feel socially? Do they feel socially ostracized? What is their family relationships like? There's these levels that create the identity of the person. And yeah, I feel like it was a really good show to kind of demonstrate how that can happen and it can lead to a really terrible outcome.
Yeah. One of the things as well it talks about in the show, Kyra, is toxic masculinity. And I think it's also a buzzword. You could say the same thing with toxic femininity. No such thing, just toxic people, you know. I think masculinity and femininity are both wonderful things. We complement one another, men and women. We're better together than we are apart. Young boys, especially now, I think I do worry they are prone to misogynistic content online. But, the argument is that, some of this red pill stuff and Andrew Tate come into the play. And Andrew Tate isn't to blame at all. I think we are as a society. We've forgotten how to, connect. I think boys especially, they're looking for father figures and role models because maybe they didn't have that growing up. And I think this is why young boys need a good brotherhood. um and you're mentioning too therapy, and I learned as well, Kyra, that men tend to bond shoulder to shoulder, whereas women tend to bond face to face. And I had Sammy Wood on my podcast a year ago. Her brother tragically took his own life. Um, And I think male depression gets treated like female depression. All men, and I said before, all men want to do, and they want to feel capable and powerful. Uh, and I think there is that disconnection. Do you agree that I think therapy in particular is more in favor for women, and yet for men it's a little bit different? How can we better cultivate more, meaningful relationships with men, but how can we better support men? What do you think we need to do?
So I think when it comes to therapy, there's definitely going to be different methods that help people in different ways. When it comes to people that genuinely do want the support and the help, there is people that offer it in alternative ways. I know in the Gold Coast, there's a guy in Currumbin. He's a psychologist or a therapist, and he does his therapy. He works with men, and he goes for like a smoke with them or a surf with them. He does something with them. And it's not like a therapy session. It's like he hangs out with them, he talks to them, he helps them, but he does it in his way, he does it through connecting with them in a way that they're comfortable with. And it is that shoulder to shoulder, they're doing something together, but he's able to help them and connect. So I think look for things like that. Look for things where you can get help in ways that make you feel comfortable. I do feel like the reality is like we can't control what has happened to us in the past, and what's happened to us is definitely not our fault, but we do have a responsibility. Each and every person has a responsibility to heal their shit and look after themselves and learn how to stop letting their emotions run their life, because it doesn't just affect you, it affects every single person around you. And like sometimes that is the hard reality we need to accept, is that oftentimes it's up to the person to choose to want to actually get better. It's not, we can't really force it onto people. And the best way that you can help people around you is by leading them in that direction, by working on yourself first. So whenever clients come to me and they say, like, my partner isn't doing this, he isn't doing the work, blah, 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 I would say, stop focusing on him, focus on leading yourself and showing, like, being there for him and supporting him, but focus on yourself, because if he sees you do the work and you become this happy, better person, he's going to go, oh, I want to do that. I want to be like that. But if you say, you need to do this, you need to do that, he's going to say, no, like, I don't want to do that. Like, I don't need to be fixed. And he's going to retreat and go inside. So you need to lead the way. It is the only possible way. And I know in my own experience, when I did personal development, when I stopped sabotaging, when I became more confident, when I was finally able to communicate my emotions and not be a bitch, then it gave permission, like, to everyone around me to start going on their own journeys for, healing and looking at their past and actually feeling comfortable feeling their emotions, because I led the way. Like sometimes
Mm,
that is the only option.
yep.
Just focus on yourself and they will come along with you.
Yeah, it's that old saying, isn't it? You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. Um, and I think too, yeah, we do need to sort of fine tune and work on ourselves. And you've worked with athletes, that's fascinating. What are some of the things that you've done with them?
Yep. So with athletes, I guess the main thing comes from that mental performance. So that ability to perform at that higher level mentally, which significantly impacts their physical performance. And so I guess the mental performance can be impacted in a lot of ways. So there's a few different ways I would go with it depending on the client. But a lot of the time, I feel like there's a group of athletes who know that they have struggles with their mental performance. They experience nerves, they experience maybe they sabotage, like when they're training for a fight. Maybe they really struggle to cut the weight because they sabotage by eating too much, for example. Then there's a group of people who actually have no idea. And they're like, no, I'm good, I'm fine. But there's something called self-handicapping in athletes, which is when you basically subconsciously engage in things that can impact your performance. So, for example, there is a group of athletes who they will get very sick. I'm just going to talk about fighters because I mostly work with combat athletes and swimmers, but so they will get very, very sick before they fight. They will do reckless things and get random injuries before they fight. They will like do things that you're like, why would you do that? Or it's things like, how do you get so sick all the time just before you fight? And it's this subconscious fear that they don't recognize that they have that significantly impacts their ability to fight or their ability to compete. And so sometimes it can come from that fear of being seen, fear of being judged, fear of failing, fear of success, all these things. And so the way that they sabotage that can be through under preparation. It can be through, like, sabotaging their preparation for the event. It can be when they actually compete. Like, if you perform better in training than you do when you compete, you have a mindset problem. That's all it is. It's a mindset problem. You can't handle pressure. You don't know how to compete under pressure. That's the problem. So if you'd learned mental performance skills, which is just a set of skills based on your experience, like your internal thing and what you're navigating, you would find you will perform so much better under pressure than you do in training. But you need to learn how to make that flip. It's a skill you have to learn that you haven't learned yet. So I would say just a couple of examples would be the performance under pressure. One of the best things you can do to increase your performance is visualization. And I have had, like, not even exaggerating, I look at some of these statistics with clients I've worked with. The amount that their performance increases is absurd just through visualization, because what it's doing, I'll give you an example. Ian Thorpe, they did a massive review on him. He used to visualize every possible outcome when swimming, when racing. And so he would visualize the stadium he was competing in. He would visualize walking up to the blocks, getting ready, standing on the blocks, diving in. He would visualize the perfect race where he gets his PB. He would visualize if he races and his goggles come off, how would he adapt? Every single thing that could go wrong, he visualized it. I think it was 2004, one of the previous Olympics. He dives into this race and his goggles come off and he performs, he still breaks the world record. And they interview him after and they say, like, how do you do that? And he said, oh, I already knew how to handle it because I'd visualized it. He had already created the pathways in his brain. Same with when you perform under pressure. If you visualize walking into the ring, getting ready for the fight, you visualize all the things going wrong and all the things going right. Your brain has a plan if things go wrong. But if you don't mentally rehearse that every single day, your brain's going to freak out under there. And that subconscious confidence and that ability to handle pressure is not going to be there if you don't practice it beforehand, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's fascinating, Kyra. There was a study they hooked up to the brains of Olympic sprinters, and what they discovered was they asked them to visualize the race. Like visualize how they would start the race, like 100-meter sprint, right? They get down on the blocks, ready, set, go. And what they discovered was the same chemicals and synapses within the brain were exactly identical as if they were running the actual race. Like, it's pretty fascinating what the power of visualization can do, in particular for performance. That's fascinating. Yeah, so you do a lot of visualization with athletes.
Yeah, and there's lots of different types of visualization. Like there's the different aspects of visualizing, just visualizing everything going well. Then there's certain visualizations where you actually have to engage all the different senses. I've had athletes go into where they're competing and do the visualization at the place, for example. So there's that you can have very specific types of visualization depending on the thing. I had a previous athlete who really struggled with fear of success because she thought she feared failure. But in reality, which is the reality for majority of people, they actually fear success because if I fail, cool, maybe I get criticized, I go back to what I was doing. If I succeed, oh my gosh, I'm going to be criticized. People can judge me. I'm not going to be relatable. My family might not like me anymore. I might not know what to do with myself. I don't deserve it. There's so many more stories around success. And so for them, it was more so about visualizing being successful and feeling safe in that success. Because if you don't feel safe in success, you're going to sabotage it every step of the way because your body's going to pull you back and say, no, this isn't safe. So sometimes the visualization is in, okay, let me visualize what winning looks like. Let me visualize the good things about winning, how I feel safe, how everyone is still there. That creates safety and allows them to actually pursue that and progress towards that.
Yeah. Kyra, if you could give one actionable tip to improve mental well-being today, what would that be?
Mm, I would say spend more time in silence. Because if we're constantly distracted and constantly consuming, you just don't get your brain a chance to rest. So I would say eat in silence specifically. Eat in silence, do things in silence here and there, at least once a day. Do the dishes in silence, drive in silence, just do something in silence for once in a while. Because when we are in silence, we allow ourselves to kind of connect back with our body. And when we connect back with our body and we create safety in our body, that is when we are emotionally regulated, we're calm, we're able to take action in direction of our goals. You know, we're able to be a lot more like focused and on, and we're a lot able to rest because we know the signals, because we give our brains a break.
Yeah, definitely. Kyra, where can people find you? You're on social media, you're on Instagram. What do people need to do if they want to book in with you?
If you just send me a DM, I work with people individually depending on their unique needs. I'm very aware that everyone has different stories, and I really enjoy talking to people and getting to know them and stuff. I do have a big variety of free resources as well in my bio. So please, if you listen to this, like I would love to talk to you in general. So my Instagram's just at Kyra Le Sech. Just send me a DM. And yeah, I would love to talk to anyone.
Mm. And have you got any workshops lined up down the track?
I do have one that will be coming up towards the end of the year that will be an in-person event. Otherwise, I do have regular online events as well. So there's something pretty exciting that I'll be announcing and launching soon once I've finished building it. So I would just say follow me to keep up to date with everything.
Amazing, Kyra. Fascinating conversation. I could talk to you for hours. Very interesting. Thank you so much for your time.
No worries. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Kyra.
See ya.